I met Mort Sahl in the early 1960s. He was one of America's great satirists, political commentators, comedians, and social observers. Although the landscape of the genre was dominated by Lenny Bruce and Mort, he was far more cerebral, less caustic, and made a point of never using a four-letter word on stage, or for that matter, having a drink or smoking a joint. Ever. He recorded the first comedy album. He was the first comedian on the cover of Time magazine. He sold out nightclubs all over the country. He wrote jokes for President Kennedy. He has appeared as an actor in a number of films, hosted a television show, wrote screenplays, an autobiography, and became my first political and social mentor. There came a time in Mort Sahl's career where he developed an unquenchable curiosity about the assassination of President Kennedy, and would venture to New Orleans, where he volunteered his time to Jim Garrison, the district attorney, who was portrayed in the Oliver Stone film JFK. Garrison prosecuted a man who he charged with being involved in a conspiracy to murder the president. For the record, that man was acquitted, and Mort Sahl returned to Hollywood, where he was criticized, castigated, and deemed an unwelcome guest. He lives in Northern California now, and we still remain friends. Over 40 years, he has never forgotten to call and wish me a happy birthday. I still consider him to be one of the most astute observers of the American political experience.
KPFK listener-supported Pacifica Radio, Los Angeles. My name is Elliot Mintz. This is Looking Out. Mort, it is just, I can't tell you what a gas it is to have you here tonight.
Well, we moved heaven and earth, Elliot, as you know, and listeners don't know. There's an abundance of riches. In addition to, first I was doing nothing. I don't know how many of the listeners know that. In addition to doing the show, after you and I got together and we decided to do this, and then, of course, they called from New York and said they had a Johnny Carson show for me in that way that they have of calling that always sounds like, Operation Head Start. They're going to help me, urban renewal. The fact is they have a lot of letters and they can't hold the audience on a chain that much longer. They want to know if I'm dead or not. So they're going to import me for the show, and they want to do it Monday. And that would mean, of course, flying in Sunday because you have to report at noon in order to brief the producer. So there's no way to do it. They won't let you fly in that day because they're afraid of weather delays. Then they wouldn't let me. I said, well, I have a show to do in Los Angeles on Sunday. And they said, cancel it. And I said, I can't do that. And then I said, I'll have to cancel this. I said, well, you've been canceling a lot of shows, That won't look too good. And then, of course, the singular morality. Then I said, what about Tuesday? They said, well, you couldn't be on because Bob Hope is on Tuesday. And he has a different position than you on Vietnam. They told me that, so I couldn't be on with him. And then I finally put it off until Thursday. I'll be on the Carson Show Thursday night, for those of you who have a duality of purpose and listen to KPFK and watch NBC. But they're covering the full spectrum.
I think Jim Garrison once described NBC as the network who believes in the right of the people to know, right?
He's not afraid of them, which is enough in itself. And I spoke with Mark Lane this week, who's in New Orleans, and I'll be down there later this week after the New York trip. And as you know, he has a public bribery indictment against Walter Sheridan of NBC. And Walter Sheridan has a strange history for a broadcaster. As a matter of fact, Bill Stout of CBS once put it this way to me. He said, when it came to the Garrison case, NBC didn't use a reporter. They hired a house detective. They hired one of Robert Kennedy's lawyers on the Hoffa case to
Really?
operate there. Yes, that's who Walter Sheridan is. And he did the Frank McGee show, which was called The Case Against Jim Garrison. And he went down there, and Garrison has an indictment against him on the basis of publicly trying to bribe Perry Russo to defect to California, where he would not be extradited, and to discredit Garrison publicly. And Garrison also charges in that indictment that Russo used, not Russo, Sheridan used the phrase, "I will destroy Garrison. I'm here to destroy Garrison." He used it many times around New Orleans. Now, NBC turned that show over to Sheridan, not to any of its other reporters. He felt, as he said in Playboy, Garrison, that NBC had gone, even they felt they had gone, Sheridan had gone too far, because they gave him equal time very quickly. They kind of backtracked. On the other hand, we find with Newsweek, Newsweek's continual blasts at Garrison, and I want to tell all the good liberals out there that that's your journal, Phil Graham, The Washington Post, good social democrats, not Time magazine, not a fascistic magazine, but a good liberal magazine. Newsweek hired Hugh Ainsworth to cover Garrison. They said he's an outstanding scholar, having worked for the Dallas Times-Herald. An outstanding scholar. For instance, in his last exchange with Mark Lane in Dallas, he told Mark Lane something to the effect that Warren was not objective about Oswald because both of them are left-wingers, extreme left-wingers.
Wow.
So that's the guy that Newsweek feels is an authority on the case.
I want to begin at the beginning.
All right.
And follow this thing very, very closely so we can really understand not only what's surrounding the suppression of what Jim Garrison is doing in New Orleans, but also what has been done against you personally. Now, when did it... There was a time that you were appearing in nightclubs and making billions and billions of dollars and selling record albums, and you were a comedian and the rest of it, and you didn't talk about the assassination. Something then happened that obviously was to lead to the change of your entire life. When did it begin for you, Mort? When did you begin to...
Well, I began to ask questions about this case. I used to ask them socially, and I couldn't find anybody to answer me. But then I only mix with liberals, so that's like looking for an honest man and not having a lamp. And then, of course, I ran into, when I had the television show over at Channel 11, we had... Mark Lane was coming into town, and he was originally scheduled on the Pine Show, and some benefactors steered him toward my program instead, and he did cancel the Pine Show, and they were furious, and as well they might be, I suppose, about a commitment. And Mark Lane came on in October of 1966. Right. He came on with me, and he made 5 appearances. Publishers Weekly and the New York Times agree that Rush to Judgment is a national bestseller because of California and because of Southern California, and more specifically because of that program. And we sold a lot of books. I told people it was the most important book in their lifetime. I told Lane when I met him that I thought he was the most important man in the country.
Rush to Judgment.
Absolutely. And I think Garrison has now replaced him as the most important man in the country. When we Mark and I got along very well, and the shows were good. We found we didn't need, actors or fun and games or anything. We just had to talk, and the people cared about it. And we really got a storm going, and because the people responded, I kept going with it. Then, of course, the KLAC show was in the works, and I kept going with that. And when the KLAC show began to roll, of course, I got the first national interview with Garrison. I got 90 minutes on tape with Garrison and Lane, which I paid for my own trip to New Orleans because the station didn't think it was worth it. After all, I was only a man investigating the murder of the president.
This is radio station KLAC.
KLAC. And I went down there and I came back and I played that. And of course there was great suppression at KTTV. The program director, Jim Gates, kept saying to me, theatrically, he said he wasn't suppressing me. It wasn't a matter of censorship. It was a matter of showmanship. And he said, theatrically, it's boring just hearing you talk about Kennedy. And even when I was finally fired at KTTV the first time, which was a year ago December, he came to my house and gave me my notice and said, your ratings are very bad, and you're going off. And instead of leaving well enough alone, he then got nervous and said, I think it's because you just talked about the same thing all the time. Kennedy, Kennedy, Kennedy. We're sick of hearing about Kennedy. And I'm excising the profanity. So, as we also always say, speak for yourself, John Alden. I haven't found too many people in the American electorate who are really sick of talking about Kennedy. I find people who are cowed and who are fearful, but I don't care what happens to them for talking about Kennedy. Anything that happens other than having your head blown off in Dealey Plaza is somewhat anticlimactic. Sane men have grown insane on this subject. For Robert Vaughn to be quizzed by Senator Robert Kennedy, to be pursued around Senator Kennedy's mansion, why was Mort Sahl fired? Why does he claim he was fired? And for Robert Vaughn to say, I was fearful of the interrogation, so I said I didn't know. And then for Robert Vaughn publicly to declaim, well, as a matter of fact, Senator Kennedy is a very busy man. He has the world on his shoulders, and he doesn't have time to even know who Mort Sahl is. I don't know what makes people move this way, but only in this case. I have found some continuity of integrity on the part of people in any issue but this issue. Now, I'm skipping here chronologically, which I don't mean to do on you, but...
Let me raise a question.
Yes.
At its peak, your KLAC telephone talk show and the KTTV television show, what were the ratings like? What was the audience response
Well, the ratings on the television show were good and healthy, and I think that it's important for the audience to know that we presented 30 to 40 minutes of sketches every week, and I wrote them, and I produced the program myself, and I was in the office 7 days a week, and I did all the monologues in between, and I booked the guests, and I was on there for 2 hours. I spent 7 days in that office, and I made $600 a week, gross. Now, that's a pretty cheap way to bring in a show, which is sold out on sponsorship. No sponsors complained, and you must be very guarded about that. When you hear remarks such as KLAC made about Arbogast and Margolis that had no sponsors, it has become a device in our society because there is an integument of new left feeling that capitalism will censure people, that it's the sponsors. It very seldom is the sponsors.
How were your sponsors on the program?
I never had any trouble in television. We were sold out, and they never complained. We even kidded them, especially the used car people. We were sold out. Gates himself said at the end of the show that when he finally discharged me for something he called insubordination, he said, you are, which we'll get to in a second, he said the ratings were healthy, and the show was a good, entertaining show. But this guy can't follow direction. That's said many times, and of course that may be said with a gleam toward heading you off the path so that no one else will hire you either, because it is a limited industry to begin with. Limited in courage, limited in perspective, limited in goals. When the radio program was on at the same time, of course I had Harold Weisberg on, I had Lane on, and we rang up tremendous ratings. Jack Thayer, who was the potentate at KLAC, brought the ratings by, and the evening shift at KLAC had a 17.7 the last time he brought them by, which meant it passed KHJ. People were really listening. Why were they listening? Because I was talking about their president, whom they love. I was talking about the draft, which is every young man's stake, and I was talking about where I thought it was at, because I was taking their pulse. Now, because so, they, of course, in the superstate, to paraphrase Garrison, they must drop you for not communicating. The fact is, they drop you because you do communicate. That's the real crime, to reach other people. I was never such an extraordinary man until I became an ordinary man and joined the people, of course, when I began to express really what was on their minds, but I took a different course of action. I took a course of action which satisfied me. Now, when they dropped the radio program, they gave me no notice. The night they chose, I said to the audience, should I disappear, it is not voluntary. I'll stay here as long as you need me and you want to talk to me. And if I disappear, you must rise as an army. It is not voluntary. I played Kennedy's inauguration, Roosevelt's inauguration, and a Garrison speech for 20 minutes. And the next day I was told not to report. The agency that represented me at that time did not contest this. They're not interested in money. In a capitalistic society, we're together.
Which agency was that?
And Creative Management Associates. And They did not rise as an army. In fact, one of the executives up there quoted me a story by Jill Sherry in the Free Press. It's good to know they read the Free Press, isn't it? It's amazing, huh? They don't quote it when it's not convenient, though. It's got to be the Free Press on their terms.
They've got to figure out some way, of bringing it back home for them on a personal level.
That's right. Document it. Bring it back home. Very well put. So they dropped the show, and somebody who I guess I shouldn't betray the confidence. Somebody who was influential here in town said to me, "You're going to be dropped on television now. The only difference is the first time you were fired, and a lot of you remember this, when I was fired on television, I talked about it on the radio. The station got 31,000 letters and reinstated me. This time, 31,000 in 3 days at one source, Jim Gates. I got a couple of thousand myself up in Las Vegas at Caesar's Palace, and other people at the station got letters. That was the core of them in 3 days. This time, they cut the live show, the radio show, and then the television show was controlled by tape. So I immediately received a letter saying, "You've been fired on radio. That is regrettable. Do not discuss it on television. If you do, this will be insubordination." And then I got a series of letters for record. They would come every day, special delivery from Jim Gates at KTTV. And they would say, "Do not discuss this." KLAC maintained that Mort is gone, but anybody's free to, he has his platform at KTTV. So Mark Lane then directed one of the young men on the Citizens Committee of Inquiry, which I want to talk about later, to call the station and say that it is obvious I'm the only public platform for the district attorney in New Orleans, and therefore it is his opinion that contributed to my being fired. They wouldn't let the young man on the air. So since they had said I had my own platform in television, I put him on television. So they erased him from the television tape and sent me another letter and said, "You cannot bring this up. You're not to discuss the radio station." So I checked with an attorney, and the attorney said, that means that in their interpretation, for them to beat you with chains and for you to go on the air, and if someone in the audience says, "What is that scar?" you say, "They hit me with a chain," that's termed disparaging by them. You have a right to express yourself under an FCC license granted to Channel 11, as long as you don't disparage them. So I went on the next week, and I said that tape was erased. The young man was on there. So they erased that tape. And they sent me another letter. And they said, "If you mention anyone at the station by name or by title or refer to the fact that you have a radio program, you will be fired." That day, I was in the office, and Garrison called me from New Orleans, and he said, "I have an exclusive for you to break on the air. I have eyewitnesses placing Ruby, Oswald, and Shaw together in Baton Rouge. Eyeball witnesses." So I went on the air, and I told that on the air, and I mentioned about 3 minutes about the radio program, which I isolated so that if it was cut out, they could see the rest of the show, which was funny. It was a good show. Biff Rose was on, Phil Oakes was on, Hamilton Camp, Joyce Jameson. They erased the entire tape and sent me a letter the next morning firing me for insubordination in mid-contract at a time when they owed me $83,000. So that's a capricious form of behavior, you might think, for a large organization. But they saw fit to do that over this issue. They saw fit not even to call me in. And I want to make a point here that this is not, capitalism is, shape up or ship out. This is the way we do things. This is a different form. No one came to me and said shape up. That it was just over. No one spoke to me. Nobody. Just the vast silence.
My guest is Mort Sahl, and we'll continue with much more. All right, so here you are at KTTV and KLAC with incredibly high ratings, 31,000 letters received in a period of 3 days, and having turned Los Angeles on to obviously the most important issue of the day, and you are fired. You are through. What was it like after that, Mort? Did you start to go around and look for other jobs right away?
You see, KTTV, this pending legal action, I'm going to the union for arbitration through AFTRA, which I'm a member and have been for 15 years, to settle this. So I'm not saying there's a correlation between what I said about the assassination and what happened there. But the assassination is not my first experience at twisting the arm of the establishment, and it's not my first experience at being threatened or paying for it. I'm the same guy who was on the cover of Time magazine August 8, 1960. I'm the same guy who emceed the Academy Awards with Laurence Olivier, Bob Hope, Jerry Lewis, and Tony Randall in 1960. And I'm the same guy that had my own show on NBC a few years ago. I'm the same guy that's been under contract to all 3 networks. Now, what was the attitude? You know, we have to use a very broad canvas, if not a broad brush here, to see what the attitude is here. I am submitted to network shows at the same time because I have a national reputation. When I was submitted to the Dean Martin show, the agent was said, "Oh no, not that guy. Never. Because he's making speeches and he's gone crazy on that subject." I've gone crazy. It's only a couple of years that they were selling Kennedy to me. They thought I was for Stevenson. That's because I like to know who I'm voting for. And I confess when I meet a stranger. I don't condemn him, but I ask who he is before I vote for him. That happened to me repeatedly. And of course, you know, I saw the whole liberal syndrome. I tried to call it the way I saw it in Los Angeles. And there were many subjects on that program. And while I want to stay with the assassination tonight, I just briefly want to point out that everybody knows who they are. And that since God put me into the role of holding the mirror up to Dracula, who knows very well what he looks like anyway, they didn't stand up to be counted when they were needed. I made the appeal. I stood up there and I said, "You know who you are, and you know the fight I'm in. What's at stake is America, in essence." That's the reason that when Bud Schulberg went to Watts and sold a television show off it, or 2, and the articles to Playboy, I pointed out that Bud Schulberg knows better. Before he knew the history of the Negro people, he knew the history of the Jewish people, and he knew the history of the Un-American Activities Committee, and that we must all face ourselves. Now, that wasn't pleasant for everybody, but we had to say it on the air. I talked about all the ex-left in Hollywood and what they had become since they joined the establishment. They hadn't become right. They hadn't become anything. They had become eunuchs. And I wanted to remind them and ask them if it was worth the price. Because as Garrison says in the Faust legend, the price is you. I pointed that out. I pointed out that the country is going down the tube because we have no hope, we have no optimism as we had under Kennedy, and we're trying to rationalize a war. I pointed out, as unpopular as it may sound, that there's a vast store of Jewish people in this city who have turned their back on their commitment, which is survival, you know, who have gone the other way, and who will give Ronald Reagan a standing reception, a standing ovation, that is, in Hollywood Bowl, because he says the right things about Israel. You know, and well, I suppose everybody will, including Omar Sharif and Danny Thomas, the only 2 Arabs in the show business community. But as hard as it is going down, again, we have to point out that the Jewish people, and I know some here who even fled from Hitler, come full circle now and not only rationalize the war in Vietnam, but make the same error they made in Germany, that if they have enough money, they will buy out. Garrison is painting a picture of a neo-Nazi group, and as Jack Ruby raved on toward the end in the jail, I helped them because it was a money deal, but I see I'm helping people who will burn my people. There are Jewish elements, Jewish liberal elements, that turned their back on the president, and they know better. And I know some people out here, and they're in this industry, and they've got their answer to me is a large blue pencil drawn through my name in case I can get a job. And imagine that all they think they can do to a man in America is take away his right to make a living. In between, of course, you've got all the liberals with their knees knocking, looking the other way. I'd say something about the issue if I knew anything about it, but I don't know. Well, I'm sure that they do. In fact, those who are most fearful are those who come up with the worst conjecture. Yes, I found myself unemployable completely.
Completely. You couldn't get a job anywhere.
Yeah, nowhere. You know,
What would happen when your agents would call nightclubs, TV stations? Or
what would happen is America's not Germany, and it's not well enough organized. So sometimes guys fall in the trap, and a guy would call you, and he'd offer you a job on Friday, and by the time he'd get back to you on Tuesday, he would have changed his mind.
What happened in the interim, Mort? Who would make the telephone calls to the booking agents?
Well, I did, and then after a while, I didn't.
No, I mean, who spoke with the booking agents and the people who could give you employment and say, "Don't touch Sahl"?
Oh, you mean from the other end?
Yeah.
Well, several people. Vice president of a network here in this city, and there are only 3, said to my agent, "If I try to use Mort," he said, "whom I respect, I'll lose my job. That's a man with seniority, I might add, at the network. Vice president of leading motion picture and television studio here said, don't ever mention his name in this office. That offended. They're that offended by it.
Now, were they functioning independently, Mort, because of their own hang-ups, or was somebody actually, like, who threatened this, the vice president of the network?
Well, you don't know, because, you don't know. It's hard to be both, as I told you the other night, a corpse and a detective, too. 15% of this puzzle is missing, because people won't come out of the bushes and say, they won't come out of the shadows and say, we are conspirators. I don't believe that the government calls everybody. I think that people are sufficiently corrupt and enjoy a mutuality of interest that they will behave as they do. One of the leading television commentators said to me when I said, what are you going to do about the Garrison case? He said, well, I'm going to stay away from him. He told me that openly, that would be his course. That would be his fearless course in informing the American people of who killed their president. The best way, of course, was for everybody to call me paranoid and to look the other way. And I've had some pretty important people tell me that, because what can they do? Can they admit, again, that this is not the best of all possible worlds? Because then they might have to do a patch. They might have to do a repair job. And they're not prepared sufficiently to even sweep the room and take care of it. Be custodians of the room hygienically, let alone repaper the walls and make some improvements on the property. They are, by and large, a gutless breed. There are several levels here in Hollywood. There's the level of, I'm not talented, he's having bad luck, it might rub off on me and I'll really be in trouble, I better keep away. The straight opportunism. But there's some remarks that are hard to answer. There's Bill Cosby, who said, I have a wife and kids, I can't be seen with him.
Wow.
How's that? How's that quote? A wife and kids. And I addressed my remarks to him one week. I said, I'd like to know what you're going to leave your wife and kids. What are you going to leave your kids in America? We have America. That's all we have. That's all we have. And the signs are that we are losing her.
Mort, what about your friends? What
My
happened with
friends?
them? Your close friends? People who...
Well, they vanished. I know they're around because I go to see them in pictures all the time. But I'm glad they're still available to me on film because my memories are treasured.
Really? Was it really like that? I mean,
Yes,
right now, how
it was
many...
a social ostracism. What friends do I have now?
Yeah, how many people could you call now and say, hey, man, I'd like to get together with you and rap, you know?
Well, you're the newest. I would say Mark Lane, Jim Garrison, Maggie Field, and Enrico Banducci at the Hungry Eye.
I'm in pretty good company.
And man, that's I wouldn't go back for anything. Last week, I was here negotiating for something, and I had to go out to dinner. Had to do the thing. Had to go back, And I went out for dinner. It was very interesting. I walked into a restaurant in Beverly Hills, and you all have to, take a flight of fancy with me now. You got to remember the breed which I was. I came down the pike, and I was a great threat, 1956, 57, and they denied me. And then of course, I made it stick with the people. So then they try to absorb you. And I was everywhere. When Paul Newman put his footprints in cemented Grauman's Chinese, I emceed it for television. He asked me to. I'm that guy. I'm the guy. I made pictures, and I did television shows, and I addressed people at campuses. Okay. So I went to dinner, and I walked into a Beverly Hills restaurant, and my former manager was there, who still handles the affairs of Peter Lawford. He's a guy who once threatened me with never working again in America.
Peter Lawford?
If I did, both of them, if I didn't stop kidding President Kennedy. They loved him, you see. They also, these same people, then change gloves from the left hand to the right hand and see that you continue not to work for asking who killed him. President Kennedy, is very lucky that I can be objective, as his memory is, that I can be objective about it. I didn't love him, so I can give full time to finding out who did him in. Fantastic.
You knew him, didn't you?
Yes, I did. And I wrote for him for 19 months. And I said that on KLAC. Senator Kennedy, as I understand it, asked Mr. Vaughn if I ever claimed that. And Mr. Vaughn said, with the customary courage, I don't know what he said. Well, I said it. In fact, Senator Kennedy's had the opportunity to ask me. And for those of you who can't get a framework on this, you must remember that I go into the White House at will. I repeat to you, at will. I ate with Senator Kennedy last May, and I ate with Lyndon Johnson the May before that. And when I was in Washington for 5 days in July, I went to the White House, 3 of them. I walked through the gate. They know me. They know me, and I refuse to go away. I'm like a very persistent epidemic. Now back to the point. So I walked into. Well, it's interesting in light of having that access, and then doing a local television show, and having people running for Congress, using me in the most opportunistic vein. If nothing else, they should not think that I'm a fool, and they should not think I'm ambitious on the level of the House of Representatives. I've rejected the best, you know. So if I'm neurotic, you know, A1, you know, 0 cool. But anyway, back to the, yeah, and I forgot to mention I used to sit in with Senator Fulbright in the afternoon, at will, whom I really dig, although I'm sure that a lot of liberals out there think he's a racist. That's their way. At any rate, so I walked into Stephaninos, and I walked in with a good guy to talk some business. And there sits Mr. Evans, who doesn't say anything to me. I've openly accused him on the air.
Who is Mr. Evans?
Mr. Evans is Mr. Lawford's manager. He used to be my manager.
I see.
Confidant of the president at a certain recreational level, and who now thinks, you know, that guy's killing himself by discussing that subject, the assassination. He's doing himself in. He's self-destructive. It's a terrible thing to watch. But they watched it every Friday night as long as it was on. He's sitting in that restaurant, and people came through the door, actors who know me and know him. And they refused to speak to me during the evening. They averted their heads. There's that much terror. And then a manager came over to me who used to handle George Maharis. And she said to me, hey, listen, I'm not with the hate group. And I said, the hate group? She said, I don't care what anybody says. I'll use you. I'm going to do a picture that might be a part for you. I don't care what anybody says. That's in reference to paranoia. The next night, I was in a restaurant called Dominic's to further conduct business, which is great in restaurants. And Jim Arness came in, very jovial, good guy, but then he's a conservative. You have nothing to fear. He couldn't get near you because he couldn't find your body beneath the liberals pounding it. And there was George Axelrod, who used to be my friend, who 2 years ago asked me to direct a film for him. He now says, you used to be America's conscience, and now you're America's insanity. That's his reply to my plea to clean up the Kennedy case, because it started as a toothache, it is now an abscess, and eventually the patient is going to die. You have no way to get away from Jack Kennedy. You chose him, and you rise with him as the phoenix, or you go down in flame with him. Sorry, folks, but that's the deal. Now, I watched all that last week. Those are small examples, but they're the microcosm of the whole thing. The people who are fearful to talk to you, who ask you questions, and who run away from you. And it goes all the way down to the actors who would run into me in Carl's Market or the Mayfair on Santa Monica at 2 in the morning, and when it was open that late, and they'd say to me, hey, what's with your friend Garrison? He better get his head examined, they'd say to me. And I'd say, in essence, this is what's with my friend Garrison, because the Playboy thing was in work. The interview was coming. I'd say, the president reached an agreement with the Soviet Union about Cuba, among other things. And he sent the FBI in to bust the anti-Castro Cuban exile group's training, and the next day the CIA gave him a blank check to go ahead and countermanded his order. And that conflict is what brought the government down. People say, you're preaching rebellion. I say, we had rebellion. The government was overthrown in Dallas, for all we know. And then they run off into the woods. And I've got them coming and going, man. I got them boxed in both ways. If they accuse Johnson, which a lot of them want to do because they want to help Roberto into the chair, then I say there's no evidence connecting Johnson to the case. And if there is, why are you nominating him and rationalizing the war in Vietnam? Or then they come up to me and they say, well, if all of this is true, aren't you afraid? And then I say, no, because a lone gunman did it in Dallas and he's long gone. I've got them coming and going because they have no position. But I tell you that I knew everybody in this town, or know, just that I don't see them. And there is no studio open. There is no television. There's just a vast uneasiness because they have to meet you. They have to meet you because the plan isn't complete. Eventually, you're going to get an invitation to a screening or a premiere, and you've got to meet them in the lobby. And that's what I got when they got to begin tugging at their collars. When Garrison came out here the last time to set up this thing on Eugene Bradley, when everybody thought all he was doing was sitting in a daisy, that's what he was doing. And I took him in the daisy, and we sat in there, and all the actors who said I was crazy, and all the comedians, 3 or 4 of whom in rebellion could have turned the tide, ran up to me and asked to meet him. They're all on his side because he's here. Can you imagine what's going to happen if he wins? I'll tell you all out there, and you all know who you are, what's going to happen if he wins. First of all, we're going to get the country back. I like that part.
Yeah.
But there's going to be a terrible retribution for those of you who denied him and think that your liberal credentials will let you change hats. You know, General Smedley Butler of the Marine Corps talked about the revolution in Nicaragua. The vast majority of peasants had no political belief, and they used to wear, the rebels had a red hat band, and the fascists had a blue hat band. And most people who were smart had a hat band that was reversible. Garrison is charged that all the attorneys defending all the people in this case are retained by the CIA, and he stands flatly on that charge. Now,
The cat defending Edgar Eugene Bradley was a former FBI man, wasn't he?
I noticed that. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I noticed that too. Also, the New Orleans States Item pointed out this week, which our papers missed here, that Dr. McIntyre, Bradley's associate there, has been active in a draft J. Edgar Hoover for the presidency movement. I haven't heard anybody bring that up, since Walter Winchell. I'd hate to see Hoover step down to the presidency, but if that's the will of the people, let it be heard. Anyway, as Garrison always says, whenever we say this, he always says to Mark Lanamy, he says, "Your sarcastic remarks about the director have made my job insufferably difficult." But at any rate...
let me interrupt for a second. Tell us about J. Edgar Hoover.
Hoover. Well, Hoover is now 73. The mandatory federal age retirement age, I should say, is 70. Johnson waived it for him. Well, of course, everybody says, the folklore is that he has so much on everybody that nobody can throw him out. He's been in office 44 years.
44 years?
44 years, which means that he looks upon the president as a transient, for one thing, and as Garrison has said, he's the finest director the Bureau has ever had, and also the only director the Bureau has ever had. So that's fantastic. Of course, the Bureau, Mark Lane says, is run, and most people agree, as a Gestapo-like organization because it reflects the views of that one man who runs it, and nobody messes with him. No one ever has. All the attorneys general walk down the hall to his office. He doesn't report to them. The only one that tangled with him was Bob Kennedy. That was about the only one.
What is the relationship like between Bobby Kennedy and J. Edgar Hoover?
It isn't very good. As reported in Look magazine, when the president was killed, Hoover informed Bobby Kennedy, called him at Hickory Hill, and he said, "Your brother's dead," and he hung up. Bobby Kennedy wanted to make certain that he realized that he was the boss, as I understand it, which is certainly right. Along with being Attorney General, by the way, as Garrison has pointed out, Robert Kennedy had the right to arrest the members of the Warren Commission as accessories after the fact and ask that they be hanged, which I do not believe he did, although I haven't gone into the record.
Why? Why is Bobby Kennedy walking around with his mouth shut?
I don't know. There are several answers. One is that, of course, the best source would be him. We would have to ask him. The second is that the elements are so terror-ridden that they would kill him if he said anything. The third is that it was a fait accompli, and all the people in the government were then told, it'll be anarchy, you must go along for the good of your country. There are, in other words, it'll bring the country down if they know what happened. Although, ironically enough, the way they brought the country up, they brought the country down. We now not only doubt the CIA, we doubt everybody. There are people who say he has a deal with the president to carry on in 1972. But I will say that he is amazingly, he has an amazing lack of inquiry about this case. When I was interviewed in Washington by Jeremy Campbell for the London Observer, it's funny how you're heard in America. I was interviewed in Washington by the London Observer. Then the San Francisco Chronicle picked up the story and ran it on the front page on Sunday. The front page, it says, "I know who killed Kennedy," says Sahl. Front page, 3 columns, with a photo. Headline. I never heard from Robert Kennedy about that, even to admonish me for being irresponsible. Mark Lane has never heard from him, and certainly Garrison has never heard from him. In fact, there's evidence that he's tried to bulldoze the Garrison investigation. Walter Sheridan is his man. As was reported to me last May, when Robert Kennedy was out here, there was a dinner at which was present Pierre Salinger, Andy Williams, Milton Berle, Robert Vaughn, and Ed Guthman, who used to be administrative assistant to Robert Kennedy, is now the national editor of the L.A. Times. And you know their view on Garrison.
Mm-hmm.
The only time they give up that cartoon section, they let Johnson off for a day, is to go after Garrison. Guthman got up and said, "Gee, Mort's through in the business, and it's a shame. He committed suicide by hanging out with Garrison and Lane." First of all, I appreciate their concern for the post-mortem about me, and I appreciate the judgment that I'm through, obviously, and I wonder what would make them say that. I wonder why Garrison and Lane would be the enemy. They're only acting as patriots. They're proving that they love their president. You know, not that because he's a dead president, he's not a remembered president or spirit in this country.
Mort, do you believe Bobby Kennedy right now has a pretty good idea who killed his brother?
I don't know. I don't have any idea. Garrison has said that there is no way that the president would not know what's going on here, which is not to say he's a conspirator. No way. But I don't know. I don't know how Robert Kennedy. I don't know what he knows. I have no idea. He's quite enigmatic about it all.
You believe right now that President Johnson has a pretty good idea who killed Kennedy?
President Johnson, of course, must know. Just from an overlap of information, he must have some information. He must know that Lee Oswald did not do it. He has to know that in order for this immense cover-up to go on. So does the Vice President.
You're listening to KPFK listener-supported Pacifica Radio, Los Angeles.
So we walk up to the house. There's a tricycle in the driveway, and we knock on the door, and Garrison comes to the door in his bathrobe because he had the flu. And I put my hand out. I said, "I just came down to shake your hand." And he said, "I hope you're going to do more than that." And that was the beginning. And we sat down and we talked to him till about 4 o'clock in the morning. And we talked to him about everything. And he's got a great oratorical style, you know, and he's a true believer. He really is in the liberal tradition of this country, which some people would call a liberal-conservative tradition, but prizing the individual against federalism. And we went there on successive nights, and he brought the detectives over to meet us, the guys working, among whom was Bill Gurvich, who later defected. You recall, he made a statement to the press defecting after he left Robert Kennedy's office. Bill Gurvich, who said Clay Shaw is being railroaded and Garrison has no case, was in the office, and he told me with great relish how they got Clay Shaw, how Clay Shaw had come in. They asked him to come in, and Garrison said, "I'm charging you with conspiracy to murder John F. Kennedy." And Shaw said nothing. The perspiration broke out on his upper lip, and he said, "I'd like to go home and consider this." And Garrison said, "I don't think so," after looking at Andy Chambra, his assistant, because he knew that the guy wanted to clean out his apartment. They always know that. So they went to the apartment. Of course, they got the whips and the chains and the executioner's gown and the shoes in the shape of coffins, which he said was a Mardi Gras costume, but of course the shoes had never touched the sidewalk. Nothing but a carpeted floor.
The shoes in the shapes of
coffins. So then Gurvich told me that he was going to get Sergio Arcacha Smith, another one of the Cubans who was in Dallas, whom Governor Connolly had not extradited. He was going to go down there. He said, "If we get the extradition, I want to go get him," he said with great relish. And I said, "How much is involved in going into Dallas to bring a guy back?" And he said, "There's nothing involved." He said, "I go down there, I knock on the door, and he comes to the door, and I say, 'I got you, Arcacha.' And he said, then we come back." And I said, "What if he resists?" He said, "I hope so." And we all laughed a lot. So, and the detectives would come in Garrison's den, which has a bust of Bertrand Russell up there, and which the press doesn't tell you. The press says to you, Garrison has a picture of Napoleon. Yes, he does, but he also has a bust of Bertrand Russell, and he quotes from Hamlet a lot. And we found out a lot of things about him. We found out that when the Doubleday stores in New Orleans had James Baldwin's book, Another Country, and they seized it on the basis of pornography, and we're going to close the stores. and they asked the district attorney to prosecute the case, Garrison called the guys that had the store, and he said, "What are you going to do? Are you going to fight this?" They said, "No, we'll just pay the fine and reopen." He said, "You can't do that." And they said, "Why?" And he said, "Because next time they'll burn your books." And he helped them win, even though he's the prosecuting attorney. So we found out a good deal about him and his character, and the guys were walking in and out. A lot of the guys were voluntary because he only has a staff really of 4. And
4 people.
yeah, in the office. He's got the greatest DA's office in the country before this case. I mean, he says he has no gray mice. They're all lawyers who fight, who are very hard to come by. Because if I wanted to say name a profession that's the lowest, I would have to say the legal profession.
Why do you say that?
Oh, they really are the prostitutes of our time, because their passion can be purchased, and because the ones I've met are all starstruck, because they talk about the scales of justice, but boy, it's no accident that she's blindfolded and that her dress is tattered. They're unbelievable. They are unbelievable. Anything goes. I had a lawyer out here for 10 years. When the president was killed, he used to give presents to his clients at the end of the year. I mean, he'd send you a pitcher or plastic glasses. And when the president was killed, he sent a card out that said, "Because of our great loss this year, we're going to send the money to a donation in the sum of the gift to a clinic for mental health, because it was a deranged person that took the life of our president." Perfect liberalism. All looking the other way. There wasn't one member of the American Bar Association who said anything about defending Lee Harvey Oswald. And there wasn't one member of the American Civil Liberties Union that went in to defend Lee Harvey Oswald. And because, as Garrison said to me in the den that night, because we lost an adversary proceeding, because the law wasn't protected by lawmen, then we not only lost our president, we lost our justice too.
Mort, we come to that point, I guess, in any discussion about this particular subject, the inevitable reality that we must confront ourselves with, however difficult that might be. Who killed John F. Kennedy?
Well, as far as we can tell, I must tell you that Garrison has every confidence that he's going into court February 14th, which is a month away. And I expect he will. But the scenario points toward a coalition of anti-Castro Cuban exiles, oil-rich psychotics, I'm quoting a district attorney in Texas, retired militarists, various voices of the right, that is, at an operational level of the conspiracy, and at a planning level. The Cubans were a good setup because they were disenchanted with the Kennedy administration, and also they were lawless. You've got to remember that these informants who work for the CIA along the way, if you have government by hoodlum, what are you spawning? Every cop we know in L.A. has his contacts on Main Street or East 5th Street. He's got junkies and pimps and peddlers, etc. But he knows what they are, and he keeps them within perspective to work for the greater good, as they say. The CIA keeps them on staff for 20 years and gives them a watch at the end of their service, and that's the difference. This undercover thing of doing what you want to, and countermanding orders of the president, and writing blank checks, and not being checked by the Congress, spawns a government by hoodlum. That is not to say that the government subsidized the assassination. We don't know that, and Garrison denies it. I said, "Why do you say ex-CIA men?" He says, "Because I can't conceive of anybody in my government wanting to harm the president." But the point is, somewhere along the line, we gave up. We gave in when the government said, "We know better what's good for you than you know for yourself." That's why, the liberalism of today, whether it's Lawrence Sherman in the 28th District saying, "I'm going into the convention with a peace slate," or Robert Vaughn saying the war is the aberration of Lyndon Johnson and not Robert Kennedy, is puny. Or Carl Reiner saying Dick Van Dyke and I are going to host a black tie party at the Daisy for Eugene McCarthy or dissenting Democrats. This is 20 years too late, man. They've been drafting people like you for 20 years, so that eventually 435 honorable men in the Congress don't even object. And nobody votes against the Un-American Activities Committee. And nobody says anything about the war. And nobody says anything about anything. And nobody says anything about murder in the streets. I've been crying fascism, fascism. How much success, how heady was the sensation, and how intoxicated were the fascists in this country to get to a point where they thought they could go ahead with as bold a stroke as killing him in the street? Well, obviously, what makes them think they can get away with it? The experience of getting away with it over the years. They tend to get power drunk because they've been successful. It gets crazier and crazier. They've extended fascism without challenge for so long in this country, a generation, since 1945. The dark days, this long night started with Roosevelt's death. You can chart the whole thing, and it gets to a point where a whole generation doesn't know any better. Robert Kennedy talks about massive retaliation and communism and capitalism and vehicular capability. You're brought up on those terms, man. You can't even tell when somebody is jiving you anymore because it's 20 years of madness. As much as my Jewish friends aren't going to like it, the German people weren't born crazy. They were made crazy by their government. They were made in the form which is most convenient to that government which is fascistic, which broke the backs of the unions and used anti-Semitism as a dodge. Same thing is happening here. They're trying to drive the American people crazy, and I'll tell you something, I think they're succeeding. There's great evidence in the barbarism of day-to-day life and in the lack of direction and in the degree of the lack of mental health in this country. And I'm not suggesting going to a psychiatrist because most of them are sellouts too. Sad to say, because they know better, but all they want to do is repair you and get you back on the line to keep punching out Mustang frames. That's the trouble. Look what you have here. FDR dies. What was the plan? To make Germany an occupied agricultural state. But what happens afterwards? Truman goes into office and he forms the Defense Department, the Marshall Plan. He aids the fascists in the hills of Greece to stop communism. He founds the CIA in 1947. He gives J. Edgar Hoover a blank check, and they go ahead with the Un-American Activities Committee, and they start the great witch hunts. And McCarthy comes on. And 2 bombs on the Japanese people, civilian areas, atomic bombs. And the Korean War, the bold stroke, anti-communism. We will not tolerate it anywhere. The Truman Doctrine outside the Western Hemisphere. And Russia, and Korea, and China, and Vietnam, and Santo Domingo. You can see it step for step. 22 years of fascism, so that your country becomes a colonial power. Now, of course, we're not made for that because that's not our tradition. So that's the conflict. That's why everybody is hung up and they say, well, why do the kids look so weird? Because you're driving their body in one direction, their head is going in another. They're being pulled apart. It's the same as taking a young man in this country and tying a stallion to one leg and one arm each side and pulling in opposing directions. We're not made for it. We weren't measured for an SS suit. Man, if I was going to form a fascist state, I would go to the Germans. They're set up for it. You know, it's like Sinatra told me, you're going to buy a record company, don't found one. He bought one that was set up already. You have to be efficient. He had a commitment too, by the way.
Sinatra.
Yeah, the house I live in. I don't hear that from him anymore. I don't hear from anybody anymore. Where are all of you? Or don't you care? Because I don't know where you're going to live. You know, you can only go to make a movie in England for 3 months. That's almost closed. Where are you going to go? You can't hide in Switzerland. You know, you are an American. You're not going to feel that good. Everybody says, well, if you got enough money, you'll feel good anywhere. It's really not true. There isn't anything quite like America, especially if you're an American. You're really going to miss it. I know you take it for granted, but you're going to miss it. You're going to miss, the sun coming up in the morning. You don't think so until you're in the Holocaust, and of course, it's too late. But to get back to your question, and to stop theorizing for a while, this group of neo-Nazis who would have brought us fascism in the name of national security. The facts on who shot the president are in the archives because of national security. Everything is national security. The CIA is national security. The FBI is national security. And meanwhile, you don't recognize your own country. Look what we have here. Think of America as a body. You have, and think of the pressure points in the first aid class. Mark Lane is saying to you, I've got his pulse in the left arm, and he has an accelerated pulse. And Jim Garrison's got the right arm, and he says it. And Mario Savio is up there by his right temple, and he says it. And Stokely Carmichael is down by his left ankle, and he says it. And Adam Powell says it in his own way. Everybody tells him, and Dylan tells him. And none of these guys know each other. They don't hang out together, as the saying goes. They say the same thing. They have that in common. The patient has a high fever and an accelerated pulse. And I can't find anybody who cares about this guy. They talk about heart transplants and what happened to Mike Kasparek. They don't care what happened to America. That's what it's all about. You don't have to love your parents. I'm not demanding that. Miss Liberty, what about it? What about the pursuit of the American dream? An awful lot of good men died so that a good many of you can sit out there and think about whether you want to sell out or not. I'm worried that it's too late for you to sell in. That's what really terrifies me. I don't know whether we're over the hill or not. Naturally, I'm going to get up tomorrow and go after it the same way. The bell rings, you come out of your corner swinging, because we got to keep trying, because this is all we have. But it is evident, nobody has to be naive about the elements in this country. Why did I indict liberals earlier, the so-called social democrats of my routines, when I say the far right? Because there aren't enough evil men in this country. Their army, they are the generals, but the privates in their army, the vast ranks of the unwashed, are the liberals. It is, in other words, evil men can only do evil because of the indifference of good men, to paraphrase a philosopher. And that's what it is. The road to fascism was paved with those liberal bricks. Every young man who was headed for the left was castrated by a good liberal who wants him to fit in. And when you cock a gun and put it at the temple of a liberal, he signs the petition on the right, not on the left. There is no left in America. There is no dissension. A few university professors. How many people came up to you and said, it's a terrible thing what happened to Dr. Spock? They're just glad it didn't happen to them, right? The only reason they're talking about Vietnam is because we're talking about Kennedy. I know where they're at. They have sold us out. That's really what they've done. They've sold out a generation. Every time you meet a guy 40, you have a right to spit in his face because he's cast a shadow over your future.